The deafening crack of gunfire split the morning air as Lillian Corwin launched herself from the back of the swaying wagon, her body plummeting toward the hard, packed earth of the Wyoming Territory. It was 1878, and she'd spent 3 hellish days as a captive, listening to Silas Blackburn's promises of what awaited her when they reached his mining camp. Death seemed preferable to that fate, even if it came from the fall or a bullet in her back. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, sharp stones cutting through her threadbare dress as she tumbled down a small embankment. Lillian could hear Blackburn's curses and the wagon wheels grinding to a halt. Ignoring the pain shooting through her limbs, she scrambled to her feet and ran blindly toward a copse of pines, her golden hair streaming behind her like a banner. "You won't get far, girl," Blackburn's voice boomed across the distance. "There ain't nowhere to hide out here." He was right. The rolling landscape offered little protection, and she had no water, no food, and no idea where the nearest town might be. But anything was better than remaining his prisoner. Lillian pushed deeper into the trees, thorns tearing at her skin and dress as branches whipped her face. She could hear the sounds of pursuit behind her angry shouts and the crashing of underbrush. Her heart pounded in her ears, each desperate breath burning in her chest as she pushed forward, fighting exhaustion and terror in equal measure. The trees thinned suddenly, and Lillian found herself on the edge of a meadow. She hesitated, knowing the open space would make her an easy target, but the sound of Blackburn's men closing in forced her decision. She broke from the tree's cover and ran, tall grass whipping against her legs as she crossed the open ground. She was halfway across when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching from her left. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, moving swiftly toward her. In her panic, she changed direction, but her legs betrayed her, buckling beneath her as she collapsed into the grass. The rider reached her within moments, his horse snorting and pawing at the ground as it came to a stop beside her. Through tear-blurred eyes, Lillian looked up to see a broad-shouldered man with a weather-beaten face, his eyes shaded by the brim of his Stetson. He swung down from his saddle with unexpected grace for a man of his size. "Please," she gasped, struggling to rise. "They're coming. They'll kill you." The stranger's gaze flickered to the tree line where Blackburn and his men would soon emerge. Without a word, he reached down and lifted Lillian as if she weighed nothing, settling her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Hold on," he said, his voice low and steady against her ear. As he kicked his horse into motion, Lillian caught a glimpse of Blackburn breaking through the trees, his face contorted with rage. The stranger's arm circled her waist, holding her securely as they galloped away. The wind stung Lillian's face, carrying away her tears as the distance between them and her pursuers grew. "My name's Zachary Quinn," the man finally said as they crested a ridge. "And whoever those men are, they won't touch you again. I give you my word." Lillian wanted to believe him, but experience had taught her that men's promises were as substantial as smoke. Still, as they rode toward the setting sun, she allowed herself the smallest flicker of hope. The thundering hooves of Zachary's horse slowed only when they reached a narrow creek cutting through a sheltered valley. The sun had begun its descent behind the jagged peaks to the west, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Zachary guided his horse to the water's edge, allowing the animal to drink while maintaining a vigilant watch on their back trail. "I don't think they're following," he said after a long moment, "but we shouldn't linger." Lillian slid from the saddle, her legs nearly giving way beneath her. Zachary dismounted swiftly, steadying her with a gentle hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to think on that now," Zachary interrupted. He reached for his canteen, uncorking it and offering it to her. "Small sips. You're dehydrated." She followed his instruction, the cool water a blessing on her parched throat. As she drank, Lillian studied her rescuer in the fading light. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, muscular build of a man who lived by physical labor. His face was tanned and lined from years under the sun, but she guessed him to be no more than 30. Dark hair curled at the edges of his hat, and his eyes, when they met hers, were a startling blue against his weathered skin. "Those men," Zachary said, taking back the canteen, "they after you for a reason." Lillian looked away, shame coloring her cheeks. "The leader, Blackburn, he bought me, from a man who claimed to be my uncle after my parents died." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "He was taking me to his camp, said I'd be useful there." Zachary's expression darkened. "I understand." And somehow Lillian felt he truly did. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a controlled anger that wasn't directed at her. "My ranch is about 4 hours' ride from here," he continued. "It's not much, but you'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next." "Why are you helping me?" Lillian asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Zachary adjusted his hat, a gesture she would come to recognize as a habit when he was uncomfortable. "My mother always said doing right doesn't need a reason." He paused, then added more softly, "And I've seen what happens to people with nowhere to turn in this territory." He offered his hand, helping her remount before swinging up behind her. As they rode away from the creek, Lillian found herself leaning slightly into Zachary's solid presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing offering a strange comfort after days of terror. The night had fully descended by the time they reached Zachary's ranch. In the moonlight, Lillian could make out a modest cabin with a small barn and corral adjacent to it. A dog's bark greeted their arrival, followed by the appearance of a lantern in the cabin doorway. "Zach, that you?" called a voice. "It's me, Henry," Zachary responded, helping Lillian dismount. "And I've brought a guest." The lantern approached, revealing an older man with a silver-streaked beard and spectacles perched on his nose. His eyes widened at the sight of Lillian, taking in her torn dress and disheveled appearance. "Lord above, what happened to her?" Henry asked. "She was being held against her will," Zachary explained, his hand resting protectively on Lillian's shoulder. "I encountered them while checking the north fence line. She managed to escape, but the men pursuing her weren't the kind to give up easily." Henry's expression softened with understanding. "Well, miss, you're among friends now. I'm Henry Wilcox, the foreman of the Lazy Q." "Lillian Corwin," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Let's get you inside," Henry said, turning toward the cabin. "My wife Martha will have something hot on the stove and she can find you some fresh clothes." Zachary led his horse toward the barn. "I'll be in shortly after I settle thunder." The cabin's interior was humble but warm and clean. A woman with gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun stood by a cast-iron stove, stirring something that filled the room with a savory aroma. She turned at their entrance, her eyes widening at the sight of Lillian. "Oh, you poor dear," she exclaimed, immediately setting aside her wooden spoon and approaching. "What on earth, Martha?" Henry interrupted gently. "This is Miss Corwin. She's had a terrible ordeal and needs our help." Martha's capable hands guided Lillian to a chair at the table. "You sit right there, child. I'll fetch you some stew and biscuits, and then we'll see about getting you cleaned up." Lillian sank into the chair, the warmth and kindness overwhelming after her ordeal. "Thank you," she managed, fighting back tears. Martha bustled about, setting a steaming bowl before Lillian along with a plate of golden biscuits. "Eat now," she encouraged. "Questions can wait until you've got your strength back." The door opened, and Zachary entered, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. His eyes found Lillian immediately, a silent question in their depths. She offered a small nod to indicate she was all right, and something in his posture relaxed slightly. "Zach," Martha said, "I've set out some of Sarah's old clothes that might fit Miss Corwin. After she's eaten, I'll help her get cleaned up." A shadow passed over Zachary's features at the mention of Sarah, but he nodded. "Thank you, Martha." Lillian ate slowly, savoring each bite of the hearty stew. It was the first proper meal she'd had in days, and despite her anxiety, her body craved the nourishment. As she ate, she became aware of Zachary watching her from his position against the wall, his gaze protective rather than intrusive. "Miss Corwin," he said as she finished her meal, "you're welcome to stay here as long as necessary. No one will find you at the Lazy Q, and you have my word that no harm will come to you under my roof." There was that promise again, safety. Lillian wanted desperately to believe it. But trust had been beaten out of her by hard experience. Still, something in Zachary Quinn's steady gaze made her think that perhaps, just perhaps, his word meant something. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn," she said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Zachary," he corrected. "Or Zach. And there's no debt here." Later, after Martha had helped her bathe and dressed her in clean clothes, a simple cotton dress that had belonged to someone named Sarah, Lillian was shown to a small bedroom. As she lay in the narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the ranch, she tried to make sense of her sudden change in fortune. Blackburn would not give up easily. Of that, she was certain. Men like him viewed women as property, and he would see her escape as theft of his merchandise. But for tonight, at least, she was safe. And tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Lillian closed her eyes, the image of Zachary Quinn's determined face following her into an exhausted sleep. The morning light filtered through the simple muslin curtains, rousing Lillian from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar bed, the clean smell of the linens, until memory flooded back. The escape, the cowboy, the ranch. She sat up slowly, her body aching from yesterday's ordeal. The borrowed dress hung on a peg near the door, freshly pressed. Martha must have slipped in and taken her torn clothes while she slept. The thought of being so vulnerable, even to someone as kind as Martha, sent a shiver through her. After dressing, Lillian made her way to the main room of the cabin. Martha stood at the stove, frying bacon in a large cast-iron skillet. The older woman turned at the sound of Lillian's footsteps. "Good morning, dear. You look much better with some rest," Martha said warmly. "Hungry?" "Yes, thank you," Lillian replied, smoothing the front of the borrowed dress. "This fits well. Who is Sarah?" A shadow crossed Martha's face, and Lillian immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't pry." "No, it's all right," Martha said, turning back to the stove. Sarah was Zachary's wife. She passed away 3 winters ago, pneumonia. Lillian's heart constricted. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." "How could you?" Martha placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. "It nearly destroyed him, losing her like that. They'd only been married a year. He threw himself into building this ranch, afterward works from sunup to sundown most days." The door opened, and Henry entered, followed by Zachary. Both men had clearly been working for some time, sweat staining their shirts despite the early hour. "Miss Corwin," Zachary said with a small nod. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better, thank you," Lillian replied, suddenly self-conscious about wearing his dead wife's dress. "I hope I'm not imposing on your hospitality." "Not at all." Zachary washed his hands in a basin by the door before joining her at the table. "Henry and I were discussing your situation. The nearest town is Skidoo, about a day's ride from here. There's a sheriff there who might help, though law's a flexible concept in these parts." "Skidoo," Lillian repeated. "I've never heard of it." "Small mining town," Henry explained, accepting a cup of coffee from Martha. Sprung up about 5 years ago when they found silver in the hills. It's grown some since then, but it's still rough around the edges. The important thing, Zachary continued, is figuring out what you want to do next. Do you have family somewhere who could take you in? Lillian stared down at her plate. No, my parents died of fever in Missouri. My uncle, she faltered. The man who claimed to be my uncle sold me to Blackburn to cover gambling debts. A muscle tightened in Zachary's jaw. I see. I was a schoolteacher, she added, wanting them to know she wasn't without skills. Before everything, Zachary exchanged a glance with Martha. Well, that's fortunate. The children in this area could use some proper education. Most families are too spread out to make a proper school feasible, but there's been talk of starting one in Skidoo. Hope flickered briefly in Lillian's chest before reality extinguished it. Blackburn will look for me in towns, and he has connections, men who owe him favors. You could stay here, Martha suggested, looking to Zachary. At least until things settle. Zachary considered this, his blue eyes studying Lillian thoughtfully. It's not a bad idea. We're isolated enough that word wouldn't spread easily, and we could use an extra pair of hands around the place. I wouldn't want to be a burden, Lillian said quickly. No burden about it, Henry chimed in. Martha's been saying for months she needs help with the vegetable garden and the chickens, and if you can read and write well enough to teach, you might help me with the ranch ledgers. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Lillian looked between the three faces, seeing nothing but sincerity. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, Martha said firmly. At least until we figure out something better. Zachary's expression remained neutral, but he gave a small nod of agreement. It's settled then. You'll stay at the Lazy Q for now. We'll need to be cautious when anyone visits, but we don't get many strangers out this way. The relief Lillian felt was tempered by uncertainty. These people didn't know her, yet they were risking their safety to protect her. And there was something else, the strange awareness she felt whenever Zachary was near, a tension she couldn't quite name. Thank you, she said finally. I'll earn my keep, I promise. Zachary rose from the table. I need to check the herd in the south pasture. Henry, can you reinforce the locks on the barn and bunkhouse, just as a precaution? Will do, boss, Henry replied. As Zachary reached for his hat, Lillian impulsively stood. Mr. Quinn, Zachary, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, but he nodded. Of course. They stepped onto the porch, the morning sun already warming the air. In the daylight, Lillian could see the ranch properly, a modest operation nestled in a small valley, with mountains rising in the distance. A few dozen cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, and chickens scratched in a fenced yard to the side of the cabin. I wanted to thank you, she began. Not just for the rescue, but for treating me like a person, like I matter. Zachary's expression softened slightly. You do matter, Miss Corwin. Lillian, please, he nodded. Lillian, what happened to you was wrong. No one deserves to be treated as property. Blackburn is dangerous, she pressed. If he finds me here, he won't hesitate to hurt you or the Wilcoxes. Zachary's hand moved to the gun at his hip, an unconscious gesture. I can handle men like Blackburn, but I understand your concern. He paused, studying her face. There's something else, isn't there? Lillian hesitated. Why did you help me? Truly, the question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away, his gaze settling on the distant mountains. 2 years ago, I was riding near the Medicine Bow River and came across a woman's body. She'd been mistreated before she died. No one ever found out who she was or who killed her. The sheriff in Skidoo didn't seem particularly interested in investigating. His jaw tightened. When I saw you running across that meadow, I thought about her, about how no one had been there when she needed help. The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within Lillian. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just know that while you're on my land, you're under my protection, whatever that's worth." "It means everything," she whispered. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment Lillian felt a connection form between them, fragile as spider silk but unmistakably real. Then Zachary cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "I should get to work," he said. "If you need anything, Martha and Henry know how to find me." As he strode toward the corral where his horse waited, Lillian watched him go, trying to understand the conflicting emotions stirring within her. Fear and gratitude, certainly. But there was something else, something she couldn't afford to examine too closely. Not when her very survival still hung in the balance. With a deep breath, she turned and went back inside, determined to be useful to the people who had opened their home to her. The days at the Lazy Q fell into a rhythm that brought Lillian an unfamiliar sense of peace. She rose with the sun, helping Martha prepare breakfast for the small crew of ranch hands who worked the property. After the men departed for their daily tasks, she assisted with household chores, churning butter, tending the vegetable garden, feeding the chickens, and collecting eggs. In the afternoons, she often sat with Henry, helping him organize the ranch ledgers. The old foreman was kind and patient, telling stories of his younger days as they worked. Through these tales, Lillian began to piece together the history of the Lazy Q and its owner. Zachary had inherited the land from his father 7 years ago, when he was just 24. He'd married Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and they had planned to build the Lazy Q into one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. But Sarah's death had changed everything, leaving Zachary withdrawn and focused solely on work. "He blames himself," Henry explained one afternoon as they sat on the porch, taking advantage of a cool breeze. "Sarah got caught in a blizzard coming back from visiting her sister. Zach was away delivering cattle to the railroad. He thinks if he'd been here, he could have saved her." Lillian thought of the pain she'd glimpsed in Zachary's eyes when Sarah was mentioned. "Grief can be a prison," she said softly. "That it can," Henry agreed. "But I think he's starting to find his way back. Having you here has changed something in him." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "I'm just grateful for his kindness." Henry gave her a knowing look, but said nothing more on the subject. Zachary himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance, often leaving before dawn and returning after Lillian had retired for the night. The few times they shared a meal, their conversation remained focused on practical matters: the weather, the cattle, news from the nearest homesteads. Yet sometimes she would catch him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. In those unguarded moments, Lillian sensed a loneliness that matched her own. 2 weeks after her arrival, Lillian was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her first instinct was to run for the cabin, but Martha, who was working nearby, laid a restraining hand on her arm. "It's all right," the older woman said. "That's Jacob Miller. He owns the next ranch over." Lillian's hands shook as she continued pinning sheets to the line. Martha had helped her dye her blonde hair a deep brown as a precaution, but she still feared discovery. A weathered man in his 50s rode into the yard, raising a hand in greeting. "Morning, Martha. Henry around?" "He's in the barn," Martha replied. "This is Lillian, my niece from Denver. She's staying with us for a while." Jacob tipped his hat. "Madam, nice to meet you." Lillian managed a small smile and nod, grateful for the story they'd prepared. "Likewise, Mr. Miller." "I'll fetch Henry," Martha said, heading toward the barn. Left alone with the visitor, Lillian continued her work, acutely aware of his curious gaze. "Denver, huh?" Miller said conversationally. "Never cared for cities myself. Too many people." "Yes, it's quite different here," Lillian replied, keeping her voice even. "Quinn treating you folks all right?" He keeps to himself so much these days, hardly see him at town meetings anymore. Mr. Quinn has been very kind, she said truthfully. Miller nodded, then frowned slightly. Say, you look familiar somehow. Have we met before? Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't believe so, sir. This is my first time in Wyoming. Before Miller could pursue the thought, Henry emerged from the barn with Martha. Jacob, what brings you out this way? As the men began discussing cattle prices and water rights, Martha subtly guided Lillian toward the cabin. Best to stay inside when visitors come, she whispered. Just until we're sure Blackburn's given up the search. But Lillian wasn't convinced Blackburn would ever give up. Men like him didn't accept defeat, especially when their pride was wounded. And as Jacob Miller's puzzled expression had shown, her disguise might not be enough. That evening after dinner, Lillian found herself alone with Zachary for the first time in days. Henry and Martha had retired early, leaving them sitting across from each other at the kitchen table. Zachary was cleaning his revolver, his strong hands moving with practiced efficiency. Mr. Miller thought he recognized me today, Lillian said quietly, breaking the silence. Zachary's hands stilled. What did you tell him? That we'd never met. He seemed to accept it, but... She twisted her fingers in her lap. I'm putting you all in danger by staying here. Miller's harmless, Zachary replied, resuming his work. Just a nosy old rancher. But what if others come? What if Blackburn sends men looking for me? He has connections throughout the territory. Zachary set down the gun and looked directly at her. In the lamplight, his blue eyes were darker, shadowed with concern. Are you saying you want to leave? No, she admitted. But I'm afraid of what might happen if I stay. He was quiet for a long moment. There's an old line shack about 3 miles east of here, up in the foothills. If trouble comes, you could hide there until it passes. It's stocked with enough provisions to last a few weeks. The thought of being alone in the wilderness terrified Lillian, but she nodded anyway. Thank you. Zachary leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something, Lillian? About how you came to be with Blackburn. The question sent a chill through her, but Zachary had earned her trust. After my parents died, I discovered they'd left significant debts. The bank seized our home and I had nowhere to go. A man named Thomas Reed claimed to be my mother's brother. He offered me a place to stay while I looked for teaching positions. She paused, the memory still raw. At first he seemed kind enough, if a bit rough. But then I learned he was a gambler and not a very good one. One night he lost heavily to Blackburn when he couldn't pay. Her voice faltered. He offered you instead, Zachary finished, his voice hard. Lillian nodded. Blackburn said he needed women for his mining camp. He didn't. He didn't touch me during the journey, said he was delivering undamaged goods, but the things he said, what he planned once we reached the camp. She shuddered. Zachary's hand curled into a fist on the table. Men like that deserve a bullet, not the protection of the law. The law rarely protects women in my experience, Lillian said bitterly. Especially women without family or money. Not all men are like Blackburn, Zachary said softly. I know, Lillian replied, meeting his gaze. You've proven that. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the trust that had grown despite their caution. Zachary cleared his throat and returned to cleaning his gun, but Lillian felt the change, delicate as a butterfly's wing but undeniable. Later that night, lying in her bed, Lillian acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Zachary Quinn. It was foolish, dangerous, even she was still hunted, still vulnerable, and he was still grieving his wife. Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when he was near, or how his rare smiles lit something warm inside her. But love, she reminded herself, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when survival remained her primary concern. not when each day might bring discovery and danger to the people who had shown her such kindness. With that sobering thought, Lillian turned her face into the pillow and willed herself to sleep. The next morning, Zachary announced he needed to ride into Skidoo for supplies. "I'll ask around discreetly," he told Lillian over breakfast. "See if there's any word about Blackburn or men looking for a missing woman." "Be careful," she urged. "Blackburn has eyes everywhere." "I've been riding these hills since I was a boy," Zachary replied with a hint of a smile. "I know how to avoid trouble." As he prepared to leave, Lillian impulsively handed him a small folded paper. "A list of herbs for Martha's garden if the general store has any seeds," she explained. "And perhaps a book, anything really, I miss reading." Their fingers brushed as he took the paper, sending a jolt of awareness through her. "I'll see what I can find," he promised. Zachary was gone for 2 days. Lillian tried to keep busy, but anxiety gnawed at her. What if he encountered Blackburn? What if someone in town had recognized her description and reported it? When she finally heard hoofbeats approaching on the second evening, she rushed to the window, relief flooding through her at the sight of Zachary's familiar figure. He dismounted wearily, leading his horse toward the barn. Lillian met him at the door when he entered the cabin 30 minutes later. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "As promised," he replied, setting a small package on the table. "Your seeds and a book, Wuthering Heights." "The shopkeeper's wife said it's quite popular with ladies back east." "Thank you," Lillian said, touched by his thoughtfulness. Martha bustled in from the bedroom. "Any news, Zach?" His expression sobered. "Some. There's been talk of a man offering a reward for information about a blonde woman traveling alone or in unsuitable company. He's been through several towns in the territory, but hasn't reached Skidoo yet." "Blackburn," Lillian whispered, her momentary happiness evaporating. "Most likely," Zachary agreed. "But the description is vague and your hair is different now. Still, we should be cautious." "Should I go to the line shack?" Lillian asked, fear returning full force. Zachary shook his head. "Not yet. You're safer here for now, where we can protect you. But we'll prepare it, just in case." That night, Lillian dreamed of Blackburn finding her, his leering face looming over her as rough hands dragged her away from the lazy queue. She woke with a start, a scream caught in her throat, to find early morning light filtering through her window. Unable to return to sleep, she dressed quietly and slipped outside. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, dew glistening on the grass. She walked toward the corral, finding solace in watching the horses graze in the adjacent pasture. "You're up early." Lillian turned to find Zachary approaching, already dressed for the day's work. "Bad dreams," she admitted. He leaned against the corral fence beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Blackburn?" "Yes," she wrapped her arms around herself. "I keep thinking about what happens if he finds me." "He won't," Zachary said with quiet conviction. "You can't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I can promise that if he does come here, he'll regret it." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Lillian look up at him. In the soft morning light, with his guard down, she could see the man beneath the stoic exterior, passionate, principled, and wounded. "Why do you care so much what happens to me?" she asked softly. "I'm just a stranger who brought trouble to your door." Zachary was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of me died too, the part that could feel anything beyond guilt and grief. I went through the motions, kept the ranch running, but inside." He shook his head. "Then I saw you that day running for your life and something woke up, something I thought was gone forever." He turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. "You're not just a stranger, Lillian." You're brave and kind and stronger than you know, and watching you rebuild your life, despite everything you've been through, it's helped me remember there's more to living than just surviving." Lillian's heart pounded in her chest. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand touching his arm. "I'm alive because of you, Zachary. Not just because you rescued me, but because you gave me a place to heal, to remember who I am beyond what happened to me." His gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless moment, Lillian thought he might kiss her. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, the gesture achingly tender. "We should get back," he said quietly. "Martha will have breakfast ready soon." As they walked toward the cabin, Lillian was acutely aware of the space between them, no longer strangers, not quite friends, and teetering on the edge of something more profound than either was ready to name. The autumn days grew shorter as September gave way to October. Lillian settled deeper into life at the Lazy Q, finding purpose in the daily rhythms of ranch life. With Martha's guidance, she learned to make soap, can vegetables from the garden, and bake bread in the wood stove. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, grew calloused and capable. In the evenings, she often read aloud from Wuthering Heights, while Martha mended clothes and Henry cleaned his spectacles. Zachary would sit slightly apart, whittling or working on tack repairs, seemingly absorbed in his task, yet never missing a word of the story. The barriers between them gradually lowered. Zachary began joining her for walks around the property, pointing out landmarks and telling stories of his childhood on the ranch. He spoke more freely of Sarah, sharing happy memories rather than just grief. In turn, Lillian told him about her parents, her brief teaching career, and her dreams of someday having a school of her own. "You'd make a fine teacher," Zachary said one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "The children around here could use someone like you." "Perhaps someday," Lillian replied, "when it's safe." Their eyes met in the fading light, and the now familiar tension hummed between them. Zachary reached out slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Your natural color is starting to show at the roots," he observed, his fingers lingering near her temple. "I should dye it again," Lillian murmured, hyper-aware of his touch. "I like the gold," Zachary admitted. "It suits you better than the brown." The intimacy of the moment was broken by Henry's arrival, announcing that one of the cows was calving early and needed attention. Zachary reluctantly withdrew his hand and followed his foreman to the barn, leaving Lillian with her racing heart and confused emotions. That night, a powerful storm rolled across the valley. Wind howled around the cabin, rain lashing against the windows as lightning split the sky. Unable to sleep, Lillian wrapped herself in a shawl and ventured into the main room, intending to read by the embers of the fire. She was surprised to find Zachary already there, staring into the dying flames. He looked up at her entrance, his face shadowed in the dim light. "The storm wake you?" he asked. "Yes," Lillian admitted, settling into the chair opposite him. "I've never been fond of thunder." A particularly violent crash punctuated her words, making her flinch. Zachary rose and added a log to the fire, coaxing the embers back to life before returning to his seat. "Sarah was afraid of storms too," he said quietly. "She used to count between the lightning and thunder to know how far away it was." "My mother taught me the same trick," Lillian replied with a small smile. 1001, 1002. They sat in comfortable silence as the storm raged outside, the fire casting dancing shadows across the room. Lillian studied Zachary's profile, struck by how much younger he looked with his guard down, the perpetual tension in his shoulders momentarily absent. "You ever think of leaving here?" she asked impulsively. Going somewhere new, starting fresh, Zachary considered the question. "Sometimes. After Sarah died, I nearly sold everything and headed west to California, but this land," he gestured vaguely, "it's been in my family for 2 generations. My father worked himself to death building this ranch. Leaving felt like betraying him somehow." "Is that why you stay? Obligation?" "Not anymore." His eyes met hers across the firelight. "At first, maybe, but now. There are other reasons to stay." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Lillian's breath caught in her throat as Zachary leaned forward slightly. "Lillian." A tremendous crash of thunder shook the cabin, startling them both. Almost immediately, they heard frantic barking from outside, followed by the frightened whinnying of horses. Zachary was on his feet in an instant. "Something's wrong." He grabbed his coat and gun, hurrying to the door with Lillian close behind. The moment he opened it, wind and rain whipped into the cabin. Through the downpour, Lillian could see the barn door swinging wildly, torn free from one of its hinges by the gale. "The horses will bolt if they get loose," Zachary shouted over the storm. "I have to secure the barn. Stay here." But Lillian was already reaching for Martha's oilcloth coat hanging by the door. "I'll help." Together they ran through the muddy yard, rain soaking them despite their coats. Inside the barn, 2 of the horses had broken free of their stalls and were circling nervously, spooked by the storm. Zachary moved carefully toward Thunder, his voice low and soothing as he grasped the horse's halter. "Get the lantern," he called to Lillian, "and find some rope." She located the lantern and matches on a shelf, her wet fingers fumbling with the striker before managing to light the wick. The warm glow illuminated the barn just as another lightning strike hit nearby, sending the loose horses into a fresh panic. One of them, a young bay mare, bolted toward the open door where Lillian stood. Without thinking, she stepped into its path, arms spread wide, speaking in the calm, firm voice she'd heard Zachary use with the animals. "Whoa, girl, easy now." The mare skidded to a halt, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with fear. Lillian maintained eye contact, continuing to speak softly as she slowly reached for the dangling lead rope. Her heart pounded as her fingers closed around the rough hemp, but she kept her movements steady, guiding the nervous animal back toward its stall. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Zachary said when both horses were secured. He was soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his chin. "Perhaps a bit of both," Lillian admitted, suddenly aware of how close they were standing in the narrow aisle of the barn. Zachary reached out, brushing wet strands of hair from her face, his touch igniting a warmth that spread through her despite her sodden clothes. "You continue to surprise me, Lillian Corwin." "Is that a good thing?" she whispered. "The best thing," he replied, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. This time when his gaze fell to her lips, he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned closer, hesitating just a breath away, giving her the chance to retreat. Lillian closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, as years of loneliness and months of growing attraction ignited between them. Zachary's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as Lillian's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his neck, finally tangling in his wet hair. The storm outside faded away, irrelevant compared to the tempest building within them. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" Lillian asked, her hands still resting against his chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart. "I wasn't sure if you felt the same. And I worried it was too soon for both of us." Lillian understood what he meant, the shadow of his grief for Sarah, her own trauma at Blackburn's hands, Neither of them had expected to find something like this, especially not with each other. "I was afraid too," she admitted. "Afraid of what I was feeling. Afraid it couldn't last." Zachary's hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I can't promise what the future holds, Lillian. Blackburn is still out there, and this territory isn't kind to those who try to carve out a life here. But I can promise you this: what I feel for you is real, and I'll spend every day keeping you safe, if you'll let me." The vulnerability in his eyes moved her deeply. This strong, reserved man was offering her his heart, knowing full well the risks they both faced. In that moment, Lillian made her decision. "I want to stay," she said simply. "Here with you. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Zachary's smile, rare and brilliant, was answer enough. He kissed her again, more tenderly this time, a promise sealed without words. They repaired the barn door together, working side by side as the storm gradually subsided. By the time they returned to the cabin, soaked and mud spattered but glowing with newfound happiness, the first light of dawn was breaking in the east. Henry and Martha, awakened by the commotion, took one look at their entwined hands and exchanged knowing glances. No explanations were needed. Some things were understood without words. As Lillian changed into dry clothes, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her hair was a tangled mess, dark brown fading to golden at the roots. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with an emotion she had almost forgotten existed: hope. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she allowed herself to imagine a future not just survival, but a life filled with purpose and love. She touched her lips, still tingling from Zachary's kisses, and smiled at her reflection. The woman who had jumped from Blackburn's wagon, desperate and terrified, was still there. But she was stronger now, determined to fight for her chance at happiness. Whatever came next, Blackburn, winter, the unpredictable dangers of frontier life, Lillian would face it standing beside Zachary Quinn, no longer alone. The following weeks passed in a haze of happiness for Lillian. Each day brought new discoveries, the pleasure of working alongside Zachary, learning the intricacies of ranch operations, sharing quiet moments as their relationship deepened. Each night brought them closer, conversations stretching into the late hours as they shared hopes and fears, building the foundation of something lasting. But beneath this newfound joy lurked the constant awareness of danger. Zachary made regular trips to Skidoo for news, returning with increasingly troubling reports. Blackburn had been spotted in Laramie, then Rawlins, gradually working his way closer to their region. Each time, he left behind descriptions of Lillian and substantial reward offers for information. "He's persistent, I'll give him that," Zachary said grimly after returning from town in early November. "But winter's coming. The first heavy snow will close the mountain passes until spring. If we can hold out until then, he'll likely give up the search." Lillian wasn't convinced. "Men like Blackburn don't forget or forgive." Zachary took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Then we'll be ready for him." True to his word, Zachary increased security around the ranch. He stationed one of the hands at the property's entrance during daylight hours and reinforced the locks on all buildings. The line shack in the foothills was fully stocked with provisions, and Lillian practiced the route there until she could find it blindfolded. Meanwhile, life on the ranch adapted to the approaching winter. Cattle were moved to protected pastures, firewood was stacked high against the cabin walls, and preserves were inventoried to ensure they had enough to last until spring. Martha taught Lillian to knit, and she worked diligently on scarves and mittens for everyone, her fingers growing more skilled with each completed project. In the evenings, after chores were done, Zachary and Lillian often walked together despite the increasing cold. It was during one such walk, with the first snowflakes beginning to fall, that Zachary stopped beneath a large pine tree, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Lillian," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since I first saw you running across that meadow, brave and determined even in your fear." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "I love you too, Zachary, more than I ever thought possible." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a simple gold band with a small pearl nestled in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they claimed this land, promising to build her a home and a life worth having." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking you to be my wife, Lillian, to build that life with me." Snowflakes settled on his dark hair and eyelashes as he waited for her answer, vulnerable and hopeful in a way that made her heart ache with tenderness. In that moment, despite all the uncertainty surrounding them, Lillian had never been more certain of anything in her life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zachary." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. When he kissed her, with snowflakes swirling around them in the gathering dusk, Lillian felt as though they were the only two people in the world. The news of their engagement was met with genuine joy from Henry and Martha, who had come to love Lillian as family. Plans were made for a small ceremony before Christmas, with only the ranch hands and a few trusted neighbors as witnesses. "We can ride into Skidoo next week to see the preacher," Zachary suggested. "Make arrangements." Lillian hesitated. "Is it safe? What if someone recognizes me?" "We'll be careful," he assured her. "You'll wear Martha's bonnet and keep your head down. We'll be in and out before anyone takes notice." The journey to Skidoo passed without incident. The small mining town was busier than Lillian had expected, with wooden buildings lining both sides of the muddy Main Street. A saloon, general store, a Sayer's office, and a dozen other establishments served the needs of miners and the scattered ranches in the region. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Thomas, was delighted to hear of their plans. "Not enough weddings in these parts," he declared. "Too many rough men without the civilizing influence of good women." As they left the small church, Zachary squeezed Lillian's hand. "One more stop at the general store, then we'll head home." Inside the crowded store, Lillian kept her face partially hidden by the bonnet's brim, browsing fabric for a wedding dress while Zachary purchased supplies. She was examining a bolt of cream-colored cotton when a conversation from the other side of the shelf caught her attention. Blonde hair, green eyes, about 22 years of age. $500 for information leading to her return. Lillian froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The speaker continued, his voice carrying easily in the busy store. "Name's Lillian Corwin. Ran off with property belonging to Mr. Blackburn. He's mighty eager to find her." "Blackburn? The mining boss," responded another voice. "Heard he's not a man to cross." "You heard right. So if anyone's seen this woman, or knows someone harboring her, best speak up. Mr. Blackburn rewards friends generously and deals harshly with those who stand in his way." Panic threatened to overwhelm Lillian. She gripped the shelf for support, taking shallow breaths as she tried to think. Zachary was at the counter, his back to her, unaware of the danger just yards away. With trembling hands, she replaced the fabric and moved deeper into the store, keeping her face averted. She needed to reach Zachary, to warn him without drawing attention. But before she could cross to him, the bell above the door jangled, and a tall figure entered, a man whose silhouette sent ice through Lillian's veins. Silas Blackburn. He looked exactly as she remembered, broad-shouldered and imposing, with a bushy beard and cold eyes that missed nothing. He scanned the store's interior as he spoke with the man who'd been describing Lillian, and she pressed herself against a display of canned goods, praying he wouldn't look her way. At the counter, Zachary turned, his purchases complete. His eyes found Lillian's across the store, widening slightly at her evident distress. With subtle movements, she indicated the door and the man standing there. Zachary gave an almost imperceptible nod, understanding immediately. He approached her casually, as if they were strangers who happened to be shopping in the same aisle. "Excuse me, madam," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "Could you pass me that tin of coffee behind you?" Lillian reached for the tin, keeping her face down. "Of course, sir." As he took it from her, Zachary murmured, "Side door. Count to 20, then follow me." He moved away, stopping to examine merchandise on his way toward a narrow door at the back of the store. Lillian counted silently, her pulse racing. When she reached 20, she walked calmly toward the same door, passing within 10 feet of Blackburn, who was now deep in conversation with the shopkeeper. The side door led to an alley between buildings. Zachary was waiting, their horses already untied and ready. "Quickly," he urged, helping her mount before swinging into his own saddle. They kept to a walk until they reached the edge of town, not wanting to attract attention with a hasty departure. Once past the last buildings, Zachary led them off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forest. "He was there," Lillian gasped when they were safely hidden among the trees. "Blackburn, in the store." "I saw him," Zachary replied grimly. "And he's not alone. There were at least 2 men with him, the kind who wear their guns low and know how to use them." Tears of frustration burned in Lillian's eyes. "He won't stop, Zachary. Not ever. As long as I'm alive, he'll keep hunting me." Zachary reined his horse alongside hers, reaching out to grasp her hand. "Listen to me, Lillian. We're going to get through this. The storm that's been brewing will hit tonight. By morning, the passes will be closed. Blackburn will be stuck in Skidoo, miles from the ranch, with no way to reach us until spring. But he knows I'm in the area now. Someone must have recognized me. Or he's simply working his way through every town in the territory," Zachary countered. "If he knew exactly where you were, he'd have come straight to the ranch, not been asking questions in the general store." Lillian wanted to believe him, but fear had taken root deep in her heart. "What do we do now? We go home, prepare for winter, get married." His hand tightened on hers. "And if Blackburn somehow makes it to our door before the snow traps him in town, we'll be ready." The determination in his voice steadied her. This was the man who had risked his life for a stranger, who had offered her sanctuary when she had nothing, who loved her enough to fight for their future together. If he believed they could overcome this threat, then perhaps they could. By the time they reached the lazy queue, heavy snow was falling, driven by a bitter wind that cut through their clothing. Henry met them at the barn, concern etched on his weathered face. "Thought you might not make it back before the storm hit," he said, helping Lillian dismount. "Martha's got stew on and the fire built up high." Inside the warm cabin, they shared what had happened in town. Martha's face paled at the mention of Blackburn, but she remained practical as always. "Well, there's nothing to be done about it tonight," she declared. "The blizzard will keep him in Skidoo for days, maybe weeks. By then, we'll have a plan." Dinner was a subdued affair, despite Martha's attempts to lighten the mood with talk of wedding preparations. Lillian picked at her food, the encounter with Blackburn having robbed her of appetite. Zachary watched her with concern, his own meal largely untouched. After Henry and Martha retired for the night, Zachary drew Lillian to the fire, settling her on the bearskin rug before adding another log to the flames. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters as snow accumulated against the windows. "I won't let him take you," Zachary said quietly, sitting beside her. "I need you to believe that, Lillian." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I do believe you'll try. But Blackburn is dangerous, and he has men willing to kill for him. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you or to Henry and Martha because of me." Zachary's arm tightened around her. "Nothing is going to happen to any of us. How can you be so sure?" "Because I've spent my entire life in these mountains," he replied. "I know every trail, every cave, every hidden valley for 50 miles. Blackburn may own mines and have hired guns, but this is our land. We have the advantage here." His confidence was contagious. Lillian found herself nodding, some of her fear receding as Zachary outlined his plans for securing the ranch against potential threats. They would post guards day and night, limit trips to town, and prepare the line shack as a fallback position if needed. "And most importantly," he finished, turning to face her fully, "we're getting married. Next week, just as we planned." "But no," he interrupted gently. "Blackburn has already taken too much from you, Lillian. He doesn't get to take this too. We'll have Reverend Thomas come here instead of going to the church. Just us, Henry and Martha and the hands. A small private ceremony where you'll be safe." Tears filled Lillian's eyes at his unwavering resolve. "I love you, Zachary Quinn." He kissed her then, tenderly at first, then with increasing passion as the storm raged outside. In his arms, Lillian found the courage to believe in their future, despite the shadow that had fallen across their happiness. Later, as they sat wrapped in a quilt before the dying fire, Zachary spoke of spring and the plans he had for expanding the ranch. He described the wildflowers that would carpet the valley, the new calves that would strengthen their herd, and the vegetable garden they would plant together. "And perhaps," he said softly, his hand resting over hers on her stomach, "by next winter there will be a new Quinn in the cabin." The image of their child filled Lillian with a fierce determination. She would not let fear rob her of this dream. Whatever it took, she would fight for the future Zachary described so vividly. "Yes," she whispered, "a little boy with your blue eyes or a girl with your strength." "And your courage," Zachary added. "Any child of yours would have that in abundance." When they finally went to bed, the storm still howling around the cabin, Lillian fell asleep with Zachary's arms around her. Her dreams filled with children's laughter rather than Blackburn's threatening presence. The blizzard raged for 3 days, burying the ranch under feet of snow and, as Zachary had predicted, effectively closing the mountain passes between Skidoo and the Lazy Q. When the skies finally cleared, the world outside was transformed pristine white as far as the eye could see, with drifts taller than a man in some places. Zachary and the ranch hands spent the next days digging out, clearing paths between buildings and breaking trails to the nearest pastures where the cattle huddled in the shelter of pine groves. Lillian helped Martha with indoor tasks, including preparations for the wedding now set for the following Sunday. The Reverend arrived on Saturday, having made the difficult journey from Skidoo accompanied by 2 of Zachary's men who had been sent to escort him. He brought news that confirmed their worst fears. Blackburn was indeed still in town, asking questions about ranches in the area, and specifically about a man named Quinn. "He doesn't seem to know for certain that Miss Corwin is with you," Reverend Thomas explained as they sat around the dinner table. "But he's suspicious. Been showing her description to everyone who'll listen." "Has anyone told him about us, about the Lazy Q?" Zachary asked. The Reverend shook his head. "Not that I know of. Most folks in Skidoo mind their own business. But Blackburn's offering a lot of money, and money talks in a mining town." "Then we proceed as planned," Zachary decided. "The wedding tomorrow, and we remain vigilant until spring." That night, alone in her room, Lillian laid out the dress Martha had helped her sew, simple cream-colored cotton with lace trim salvaged from an old tablecloth. Despite the circumstances, excitement fluttered in her chest at the thought of becoming Zachary's wife. Whatever dangers lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by love and the vows they would exchange. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, sunlight sparkling on the snow-covered landscape. Martha helped Lillian dress and arranged her hair, now mostly returned to its natural golden color. "You look beautiful, dear," the older woman said, blinking back tears. "Zach won't know what hit him." The small ceremony took place in the cabin's main room, where Henry had moved furniture aside to create a space for the modest gathering. Ranch hands stood respectfully along the walls, freshly shaved and wearing their Sunday best. Zachary waited beside Reverend Thomas, his usually impassive face alight with a joy Lillian had never seen before. When Henry offered his arm to walk her to her groom, Lillian felt a rush of gratitude for these people who had become her family. The distance across the room seemed both endless and too short as she approached the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. Zachary took her hands in his as they faced each other, his blue eyes never leaving her face as they spoke their vows. The Reverend's words washed over her promises of love and fidelity, in sickness and health, until death, and Lillian responded with her whole heart, her voice clear and unwavering. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." When Zachary kissed her, sealing their union before their makeshift family, Lillian felt something settle within her soul, a sense of belonging, of rightness, that transcended her fears. For this moment at least, Blackburn couldn't touch them. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. Martha had prepared a feast despite the limitations of their winter provisions, and one of the hands played fiddle tunes that soon had everyone clapping along. Zachary rarely left Lillian's side, his hand finding hers whenever they weren't physically embracing, as if he needed the constant reassurance of her presence. As evening approached, the hands discreetly withdrew to the bunkhouse, while Henry and Martha retired to their room. Reverend Thomas would stay the night in the spare room before beginning his journey back to Skidoo in the morning. Alone at last in the bedroom that would now be theirs, Zachary gathered Lillian into his arms. "Mrs. Quinn," he murmured against her hair, "I've been waiting all day to say that." "It sounds wonderful," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. Outside, the temperature dropped as night descended, but within the cabin's walls, Lillian found warmth beyond anything she had known before, the warmth of true partnership, of passion tempered by tenderness, of two souls finding home in each other. Later, as they lay tangled together beneath quilts and furs, Zachary traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I used to hate winter," he confessed. "The isolation, the endless white, the bitter cold. Now I'm grateful for it. It gives us time for Blackburn to give up his search, time for us to plan our future." Lillian pressed closer to him, savoring the solid strength of his body against hers. "You really think he'll give up?" Zachary was silent for a moment. Men like Blackburn care about two things: money and pride. If the cost of finding you becomes too high, or if enough time passes that his wounded pride heals, he might decide you're not worth the trouble. And if he doesn't, his arms tightened around her protectively, then we'll deal with it when the time comes. But not tonight. Tonight is ours. The weeks following the wedding settled into a peaceful rhythm despite the underlying tension. Zachary taught Lillian to shoot, spending hours practicing with his Colt revolver until she could hit targets consistently at various distances. He also ensured she could saddle and ride Thunder in case she needed to leave quickly, and they regularly visited the line shack to maintain its supplies. Winter deepened, bringing shorter days and temperatures that froze breath in the air. Inside the cabin, however, warmth and happiness flourished. Lillian and Zachary established their own routines as husband and wife, sharing chores, planning improvements for the ranch come spring, reading together in the evenings, and falling asleep in each other's arms. In late January, during a rare break in the winter storms, Henry rode to Skidoo for mail and supplies. He returned with news that momentarily lifted the cloud hanging over their happiness. Blackburn had left town. Shopkeeper said he headed east toward Rawlins, Henry reported. Apparently got tired of waiting for the passes to open, said he had business interests that couldn't wait for spring. Did he say if he'd be back? Zachary asked, his arm around Lillian's shoulders. Henry shrugged. Didn't say one way or the other. But he took his men with him, and they were traveling heavy. Looked like they weren't planning on returning anytime soon. That night, for the first time since seeing Blackburn in the general store, Lillian slept deeply, without nightmares. Perhaps they had won after all, outlasting their enemies' patience through the long winter months. February brought milder weather, with occasional days warm enough to melt some of the snow before night. Temperatures froze it solid again. Life on the ranch revolved around caring for the cattle, repairing equipment in preparation for spring, and indoor projects to pass the time. It was during one such mild day that Lillian made a discovery that changed everything. She had been feeling unusually tired for several days, with occasional bouts of nausea in the mornings. Martha had watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing until Lillian finally approached her privately. "I think I might be with child," Lillian confessed, both terrified and elated at the possibility. Martha smiled warmly. "I suspected as much. The signs are there, the queasiness, the fatigue, the way your dresses are starting to fit differently. How can I be sure?" "Time will tell for certain," Martha replied. "But I've helped bring enough babies into this world to recognize the early signs. I'd say you're about 2 months along, maybe a bit less." Lillian's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach. A child, Zachary's child, growing within her even as winter held the land in its grip. The miracle of it struck her with sudden force, bringing tears to her eyes. "Does Zach know?" Martha asked gently. "Not yet. I wanted to be sure before I told him." "Tell him tonight," Martha advised. "It will give him one more reason to smile, and the man certainly deserves that." That evening, after dinner, Lillian asked Zachary to walk with her to the barn, where they could be alone. The night was clear, with stars scattered like diamond dust across the black sky. Their breath formed clouds in the cold air as they moved across the yard, hand in hand. Inside the barn, lanterns cast a golden glow over the stalls where horses nickered softly at their entrance. Lillian led Zachary to the back, where bales of hay created a private nook they had used for quiet conversations in the past. "What is it?" Zachary asked, noting her nervousness. "Has something happened?" Lillian took both his hands in hers, gathering her courage. "Yes, something has happened. Something wonderful." She placed his palm against her abdomen. "Zachary, I'm carrying your child." His face transformed before her eyes, shock giving way to joy so intense it seemed to illuminate him from within. "A baby, you're sure?" "Martha thinks I'm about 2 months along. The baby should come in late summer." Zachary pulled her into a gentle embrace, his body trembling slightly against hers. When he drew back, Lillian was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I never thought," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "After Sarah died, I believed certain dreams were no longer possible for me, a family of my own." He shook his head, wonder etched on his features. "And now you've given me everything, Lillian, everything that matters." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope into the connection between them. In that moment, the threat of Blackburn seemed distant and inconsequential compared to the miracle of new life they had created together. As February gave way to March, signs of approaching spring began to appear. The snow receded from south-facing slopes, exposing patches of brown earth. Birdsong returned to the trees around the ranch, and the days stretched noticeably longer. Lillian's pregnancy progressed without complications, her body changing subtly as the child within her grew. Zachary became even more protective, insisting she rest frequently and avoiding any discussion of Blackburn or potential dangers. He threw himself into preparations for the coming season, mending fences, checking on pregnant cows, and planning expansions to the garden to provide fresh vegetables for his growing family. It was during one of these busy days, as April's warmth truly began to penetrate the winter-hardened ground, that their fragile peace was shattered. Lillian was gathering eggs from the chicken coop when she heard hoofbeats approaching multiple riders, moving fast. Her first thought was that it must be Zachary and the hands returning from checking the herd, but something about the rhythm felt wrong. Stepping outside the coop, she shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun. Looking toward the ranch entrance, 5 riders approached, none of them familiar. And at their head rode Silas Blackburn. Fear froze her in place for a crucial moment before instinct took over. Dropping the basket of eggs, Lillian ran toward the cabin, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs. Martha was inside, preparing supper. Henry had gone with Zachary to the south pasture. There was no one else at the ranch house. The hands were scattered across the property on various tasks. "Martha," Lillian gasped as she burst through the door. "Riders coming, it's Blackburn." Martha's face paled, but she moved with surprising speed for a woman her age, retrieving the loaded shotgun kept above the fireplace. "Take the pistol from Zach's drawer," she directed calmly. "Then the back door, run for the line shack. I'll hold them off." "I can't leave you," Lillian protested, even as she grabbed the Colt from the bedroom drawer and checked that it was loaded. "You must," Martha insisted. "Think of the baby. Zach will come looking for you at the line shack when he returns. That was always the plan." She was right. They had prepared for this possibility, drilled it countless times. But the reality of leaving Martha to face Blackburn alone was agonizing. "Go," Martha urged, positioning herself by the window with the shotgun. "There's no time." With a final desperate look at the woman who had become like a mother to her, Lillian slipped out the back door and ran toward the trees behind the cabin. She had made it halfway across the open ground when a shout went up she had been spotted. The sound of gunfire erupted behind her as Martha fired the shotgun, presumably at the approaching riders. Lillian didn't look back, focusing only on reaching the tree line and the path that would lead her to the line shack in the foothills. Once among the trees, she slowed slightly, picking her way carefully along the familiar trail. Behind her, she could hear men crashing through the underbrush, following her tracks. They were gaining on her. Lillian's lungs burned with exertion, her legs trembling as she pushed herself harder. One hand instinctively covered her stomach, protecting the child within as she fled. The line shack was still at least 2 miles away, too far to reach before her pursuers caught up. She needed another plan. Veering off the main trail, Lillian headed toward a rocky outcropping she and Zachary had explored during their practice runs. There was a small cave there, hidden behind a fallen tree and large enough for a person to hide in. The sound of pursuit grew louder as she scrambled up the steep slope toward the rocks. Just as she reached them, a voice called out, unnervingly close. "I know you're there, Lillian. There's nowhere to run, Blackburn." His voice sent chills down her spine despite her elevated body temperature from the exertion. Lillian pressed herself against the rocks, moving sideways toward the hidden cave entrance. "You've led me on quite a chase," Blackburn continued, his voice carrying clearly in the spring air. "Cost me time and money, but I always collect what's mine, one way or another." Lillian reached the fallen tree, crouching low to squeeze beneath it into the narrow cave entrance. Inside, darkness enveloped her as she moved deeper into the small space, finally pressing her back against the cool stone at the rear of the cave. With trembling hands, she gripped Zachary's pistol, remembering his patient instructions. 5 bullets. Make them count. Don't fire unless you have a clear shot. She could hear Blackburn and his men searching the area, their voices occasionally rising in frustration as they lost her trail among the rocks. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited in the darkness, fear and hope warring within her. Zachary would return to the ranch. He would find Martha. Please, God, let Martha be alive, and he would come searching for her. All she had to do was stay hidden, stay quiet, and wait. But as the minutes passed, another sound reached her ears, the unmistakable snuffling of a dog. Blackburn had brought tracking dogs, and no amount of rocks or clever hiding would fool a dog's keen nose. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. The cave had only one entrance. The same way she had entered would be her only escape route. And now that route would soon be discovered. Lillian tightened her grip on the pistol, steeling herself for what might come. She would not be taken without a fight. Not now, not with so much at stake. The dog's barking grew louder, more excited as it approached the fallen tree concealing the cave entrance. Men's voices followed, triumphant. "She's in there," someone called. "Behind this log, Lillian," Blackburn's voice again, closer now. "Come out now, and no one needs to get hurt. Continue this foolishness, and I promise you'll regret it." Lillian remained silent, the pistol raised toward the cave entrance, her finger resting lightly on the trigger as Zachary had taught her. "Very well," Blackburn sighed. "Jenkins, smoke her out." A new fear gripped her. They meant to start a fire at the entrance, either burning her or forcing her to flee into their waiting arms. Lillian's mind raced. The cave was too shallow to provide protection from smoke. She had only moments to decide. Just as she heard the striking of a match outside, another sound cut through the tension. Gunfire, but not close by. Multiple shots coming from the direction of the ranch. "Boss," a man yelled. "Riders coming. Looks like Quinn and his men, Zachary." He had returned. Relief flooded through Lillian, closely followed by fresh fear. Zachary was riding into danger, possibly outnumbered. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Lillian steeled herself and emerged from the cave, pistol first. Blackburn and 2 of his men were still nearby, their attention divided between her hiding place and the commotion at the ranch. The dog, a large bloodhound, lunged toward her, but one of the men held it back by a leather lead. "There she is," the man with the dog shouted. Blackburn turned, his bearded face splitting into a triumphant grin that turned Lillian's blood cold. "Finally," he said, "my property returns to me." "I belong to no man," Lillian replied, the gun steady in her hands despite her fear. "Especially not to you," Blackburn laughed, spirited as ever. "That will change once I get you back to camp." He took a step toward her. "Stop," Lillian commanded, cocking the pistol. "I will shoot." "No, you won't," Blackburn said confidently. "You don't have it in you to kill a man." Perhaps he was right. Despite Zachary's training, despite her determination, Lillian had never taken a life. The weight of that decision pressed upon her as Blackburn took another step forward. The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Blackburn glanced over his shoulder, momentarily distracted. It was the opening Lillian needed. She fired, the bullet striking the ground at Blackburn's feet. He jumped back, genuine surprise replacing his smug confidence. "The next one won't miss," Lillian promised, her voice steadier than she felt. "Back away. Now." The two men with Blackburn exchanged uneasy glances. More gunfire erupted from the direction of the ranch, closer now. "She's bluffing," Blackburn snarled, his hand moving toward his own gun. Lillian adjusted her aim and fired again, this time grazing Blackburn's arm. He howled in pain and rage, clutching the wound as blood seeped between his fingers. "You'll pay for that," he growled. Before he could make good on his threat, riders burst through the trees behind them, Zachary in the lead, with Henry and two ranch hands close behind. They reined their horses to a halt, guns drawn. "Step away from my wife," Zachary ordered, his voice deadly calm. Blackburn turned slowly, assessing the situation with cold calculation. His men were outnumbered and his arm was bleeding, but his expression showed no surrender. "Your wife," he repeated. "This woman is my property, purchased and paid for. I have documentation." "Documentation of a crime," Zachary replied. "Buying and selling humans is illegal in Wyoming Territory, same as anywhere in the United States." "The law sees things differently for women without protection," Blackburn argued. "Her uncle signed a contract of indenture, perfectly legal." "Not when it's forced," Lillian interjected. "Not when it's a lie. Thomas Reed wasn't my uncle. He was a con man who took advantage of my situation." Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "It doesn't matter. I've spent too much time and money tracking you down. I won't leave empty-handed." His hand moved in a lightning-fast draw, raising his gun toward Zachary. Lillian didn't think she acted on instinct, raising her pistol and firing in one fluid motion. The bullet struck Blackburn in the shoulder of his gun arm, sending his shot wild and causing him to drop his weapon. Chaos erupted as Blackburn's men drew their guns, only to find themselves facing the unwavering aim of Zachary and his hands. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then slowly, Blackburn's men lowered their weapons. "It's over, Blackburn," Zachary said, dismounting but keeping his gun trained on the wounded man. "You'll leave my ranch, leave Wyoming Territory, and never come near my family again." "Or what?" Blackburn spat, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You'll kill me. That's murder, Quinn. The law won't look kindly on it, no matter what story you spin." "We're a long way from any law," Henry observed mildly. "Accidents happen in these mountains all the time. Men get lost, fall into ravines, are never found." The threat hung in the air, all the more potent for the matter-of-fact way it was delivered. Blackburn looked from face to face, finally settling on Lillian, who still held the pistol with unwavering determination. "You're not worth the bullet it would take to claim you," he said finally. "Keep her, Quinn, but know this: if our paths ever cross again, I won't be so forgiving." "Likewise," Zachary replied coldly. "Now get on your horse and ride, and if I ever see you on my land again, I'll shoot first and justify it later." Under the watchful eyes of Zachary and his men, Blackburn and his followers mounted their horses and rode away. Only when they had disappeared from view did Lillian finally lower the pistol, her hands beginning to shake as the reality of what had happened sank in. Zachary was at her side in an instant, gathering her into his arms. "Are you hurt, the baby?" "We're fine," Lillian assured him, her face pressed against his chest. "Martha, she's safe," Henry confirmed. "Took a bullet grazed to the arm, but nothing serious." "She's tougher than old boot leather, that woman." Relief washed over Lillian, leaving her weak-kneed and trembling. "I shot him," she whispered against Zachary's shirt. "I actually shot Blackburn, and saved my life in the process," Zachary murmured, his arms tightening around her. "You were magnificent, Lillian, brave beyond words." She looked up at him, seeing love and pride mingled in his gaze. "Do you think he's really gone? For good?" Zachary glanced in the direction Blackburn had taken. Men like him survive by knowing when to cut their losses. "He's wounded, humiliated, and now aware that pursuing you means going through armed men who won't hesitate to defend what's theirs." He kissed her forehead. "Yes, I think he's gone for good." As they rode back to the ranch, Lillian felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a burden she had carried since that desperate leap from Blackburn's wagon months ago. For the first time, she truly believed they had a future free from his shadow. Martha was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her arm bandaged but her spirit undimmed. She embraced Lillian fiercely, tears in her eyes. "I was so worried," she admitted, "but I knew our girl would fight." "Our girl indeed," Henry agreed, patting Lillian's shoulder affectionately. That night, after the excitement had died down and the ranch was secure once more, Zachary held Lillian close in their bed. His hand rested protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen, where their child grew safe and unaware of the day's dangers. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "If it's a girl, we should name her Martha." Lillian smiled in the darkness. "And if it's a boy, Henry perhaps. Or—" he hesitated. "Maybe William, after my father. He would have been proud to see the lazy Q as it is today and prouder still of the woman who helped make it a home again." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes at the tenderness in his voice. "I love you, Zachary Quinn. And I love you, Lillian Quinn, more than I have words to express." As spring progressed into summer, life on the lazy Q flourished. The garden Lillian and Martha planted yielded abundantly. Cattle thrived on the lush grass of mountain meadows, and the ranch prospered under Zachary's careful management. There had been no further sign of Blackburn or his men, and gradually the fear of his return faded from their daily thoughts. Lillian's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing round as the baby within became more active. Zachary took delight in feeling the child's movements, often speaking softly to Lillian's abdomen at night, telling stories of the life that awaited this newest Quinn. In late August, as the first hints of autumn touched the aspen leaves with gold, Lillian's labor began. Martha served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding Lillian through the long hours of pain and effort. Zachary paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, alternately praying and making bargains with God, until Henry finally convinced him to sit down with a glass of whiskey. Just as dawn broke over the mountains, a lusty cry announced the arrival of William Henry Quinn, a robust boy with a thatch of dark hair, and when he finally opened them, his father's startlingly blue eyes. Zachary wept unashamedly when Martha placed his son in his arms, overcome by a love he had never imagined possible. Lillian watched them together, exhausted but radiant with happiness. This was the future she had jumped from a wagon to claim, a life of her own choosing, built on love rather than fear. As the years passed, the lazy Q prospered and grew. Lillian established a small school in the bunkhouse, teaching not only William but also the children of neighboring ranchers and the Hands families. Her reputation as an educator spread throughout the region, and eventually, at Zachary's urging, she accepted a position at the newly built schoolhouse in Skidoo, riding in 3 days a week while Martha watched William. When William was 3, a sister joined him, Martha Sarah Quinn, with her mother's golden hair and quiet determination. 2 years later, another boy completed their family, James Thomas Quinn, named for Reverend Thomas, who had married them and remained a dear friend. Silas Blackburn never returned to Wyoming Territory. News eventually reached them that he had died in a mining accident in Colorado, a cave-in that many suspected was not entirely accidental. Whatever the truth, His threat was finally gone for good. On the 10th anniversary of Lillian's desperate leap from Blackburn's wagon, she and Zachary stood together on the porch of the ranch house, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, watching their children play in the yard with the newest generation of ranch dogs. "Any regrets?" Zachary asked, his arm around her waist, his face lined now with a decade of Wyoming sun and wind, but his blue eyes as vibrant as ever. Lillian leaned against him, considering the question. "Not one," she replied honestly. "Every step of the journey, even the painful ones, led me here to you, to our children, to this life. Even jumping from a moving wagon," he teased gently. "Especially that," Lillian said, turning in his arms to face him. "That was the moment I chose freedom, even without knowing where it would lead. And it led to you catching me." "Best thing I ever did," Zachary murmured, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Lillian Quinn looked out at the land that had become her home and the family that had grown from a promise made by a stranger on horseback, a promise of safety that had blossomed into a lifetime of love.